How you doing, Coach?
Fine, Paul, you?
Good. First question, and we've seen a couple open practices and kind of seen the strides that Shaq has made just from just the way he carries himself, confidence level. You can tell there's a difference. Was there a point late last season you kind of started to see that, or was it more this off season and that area where you started to see a change?
Shaq definitely had a couple better games, like you mentioned, down the stretch, but he's made the biggest strides in the summer. Of all our players, he had the best summer of all of them. Just from the vibe he had every day, and even statistically, for plus minus and just overall efficiency, he was by far our best player over the 8 weeks of summer. And then in the fall, he dipped a little bit and did a nice little sit down, and he's back to where he was. He rarely loses a sprint in practice. I mean, to me, that's a really good sign for someone that's committed and competing all the time. And it's a benchmark for our whole team of where he's at and how he's running in that regard. So we're excited for him, and hopefully he'll continue.
Go to Danny P to Coach's right.
Coach, just talk about with the Maroon Madness going to Columbus for the military folks over there, and then you've got a game scheduled for Tupelo. You're going down to Southern Miss for the charity event down there, and you've been to Jackson. Just talk about exposing your team to different areas of the state and what that means to you and what you potentially for the fan base.
Yeah, first of all, excited about Maroon Madness. It's around the corner at the end of the week. It will be a unique experience, I think, for all of us. I've been doing this for a long time, and it'll be the first time for me personally to, be on a military base for a basketball function. And, there's other programs that have played games in these type of settings, but I've never been a part of it. So on a personal level, I'm looking forward to, being a small part in the experience that we're having. And what an awesome way for our program in our university to, thank the military for, what they do for us on a daily basis. And I know there'll be some people that are disappointed that it's not open to the public, but there's so many people over there that we had to, make that decision to just for crowd control and et cetera. So I think it'll be a really cool event, and we're excited to do it. And like you mentioned, we're trying to find ways to, play in different areas of the state. We've been in Jackson. We're going to go to Tupelo, like you mentioned. We're going to play a road game at Southern Miss and Hattiesburg. We're doing the thing over in Columbus this Friday, and certainly that's something as a staff that we're trying to do to just make it easier for some people to watch the Bulldogs play and hopefully attract new fans along the way.
Go to Jackie to Coach's right.
Last season, outside of Rams and Shaq, there weren't a whole lot of options to run a point guard, but you bring in Josh Hubbard, you bring in Andrew Taylor. Obviously, it's a long way to go before you start figuring out your rotations and stuff, but do you feel like that added competition is going to make that decision tougher?
I hope so. I like when we have tough decisions to make on who we're playing. That means we have depth, and everybody does it a little bit different. For me, I cherish when I have teams that have competition, all the way down the roster. I just think it breeds success. Nobody can relax. They know that people are scratching at their heels, and it just makes for a more competitive practice on most days. And then you're set up for, an injury, a foul issue, whatever is going to happen in that particular game or season, and ultimately it's always gonna. So I just prefer it, and definitely we've increased the competition out front and in other places along the roster. And the good thing is basketball increasingly has become more positionless, and so playing two guards together that primarily are point guards is not very uncommon anymore. It's like signing a bunch of shortstops and farming them out, and that's kind of how we feel about point guards as well. As that's a hard position to play, and if they have the size and the toughness to move over, and guard bigger guys, then it makes this even better. But we definitely have increased the competition, and looking forward to the next few weeks to see how it kind of comes out.
Questions for Coach? We'll get the microphone to you. Raise your hand. We'll go back to Paul here in the front.
Now that the schedule's out, just your overall general thoughts about it.
I'm excited for it. I think it's more challenging than last season's. We felt like we had a chance to be a good basketball team, and at the end of the day, you got to try it as best you can. It's a lot of guesswork to put your team in position to have opportunities to have quad 1, quad 2 games. That's what our research says, is that's what moves the needle more than anything else. And so you've got to be creative in trying to find ways to create those quad opportunities. If it's being, playing someone on a neutral floor rather than at home, which I know, hurts a little bit with the fan base wanting more quality home games. And you've heard this from most coaches across the country. It's just really hard to do that. At times, scheduling is very difficult and it's tedious. And for whatever reason, it's hard to get teams to agree to pair up and play. But I do believe that at the end of the day, we're going to have a number of great opportunities in the fall to hopefully, get some wins that will, look good in March if we're in that conversation.
Any questions for Coach? Anything else before we let him go? We'll go back to Danny P. and then Paul.
Coach, just curious about Tubalo and how he's come into the preseason, kind of approaching things as obviously the leader of this group. And just, do you see maybe a sense of, I don't see, urgency is not the good word, but just maybe a purpose?
He's such a hard worker. It's not as if because it's his last go around, he's, up the ante for his work ethic, because it's always been there. I mean, even talking to coaches that had coached him prior to me, that was the first thing that came out of their mouths, is his work ethic and his love of the game and his dedication. And he's in there to the point where, if we're walking by, we're like, man, you got to get home, you got to get off your feet. We're going to have plenty of practice opportunities, but he's a very dedicated, student athlete. And we've had a couple conversations just in passing, like prior to practice or after practice, like the other day when we started official practice. I said to him, this is your last, first day of basketball. And, he had this, like, he was excited about it, but at the same time, he didn't love hearing it as well. And he's one of those type of guys that I believe will give it his best effort. Hopefully he'll have one of the better seasons he's ever had, but I know for sure it won't be, anything that doesn't go well won't be for lack of dedication and want to. And he's just a wonderful kid, and like you said, he's a leader of our team, and he doesn't always do it as vocally as maybe we'd like to do it, but he definitely does it by example.
If you can, any timetable updated on Keyshawn and Rams, and as far as, obviously Rams are back at practice, but what kind of return you expect them to have?
Yeah, when someone gets injured or has a surgery, we get a daily update from trainers and doctors, and Rams is in a position now where he's in his practice uniform, and he's doing some things on the court, 1-on-0 outside of basketball practice, and then he's starting to get into some of our non-contact portions of practice. I anticipate him being back on the floor sooner than later in terms of physical contact and full practice. And then Keyshawn still has a long way to go. We don't expect him to be back until Christmas time. We're hopeful that his recovery and rehab goes well, and it has thus far, so there could be a possible for an earlier return. But in the end, I don't rush them. Certainly, they come back on their own terms, and we want them to be really confident, in their bodies and their shape and their injured part of their body to get out on that court and compete. So that's kind of where both those guys are at.